27th, 2021 meeting of the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission will come to order.
Okay.
Ms. Janelle, would you please call the roll?
Each person will have to make that announcement. We'll start with Commissioner Mary.
This is Hanan Hamiri. I am living in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Commissioner Walton.
Commissioner Jude Walton, and I'm currently in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Commissioner Altman.
My name is Mohammed Athman, and I am in Ann Arbor City and State of Michigan.
Chair Jackson.
Lisa Jackson, Chair of ICPOC in Pittsfield Township.
Commissioner Shipp.
Kaya Ship, and I'm in Detroit, Michigan.
Commissioner Vice Chair Todoro.
I'm Commissioner Francis Todoro, I'm Vice Chair, and I'm currently in Lodi Township, Michigan.
Okay. Councilmember Song.
Hi, I'm calling in from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Councilmember Ramwali.
From Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Senior Assistant Attorney Slay.
Yeah, calling in from the greatest township of Ypsilanti.
Lieutenant Dortch.
Lieutenant Dortch in our police department, Scioto Township.
Chief Cox, please.
Chief Cox, I believe Ann Arbor. Thank you.
I'm just doubling down. I don't know if I really had to include you, but I'm just making sure. Okay, we're all set. We have a quorum.
Fantastic. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Make a motion to approve the 4/27/2021 meeting agenda.
I'll second it.
From Commissioner Walton, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And now we come to the time for public comment.
I don't presently see anyone, Chair Jackson.
Okay, can we say the phone number out loud? Is it the 877?
Hold on. It's on the bottom of the screen for CTN, but I don't have it in front of me. Hold on.
Looks like it's on the agenda, 877-853-5247.
Thank you.
So if you'd like to call in now or at the end of the meeting, you can do so at 877-853-5247. All right, seeing no one at this time, we'll move on. You all had the March meeting minutes. Is there any discussion of them or any corrections that anyone would like to make? Is there a motion then to approve the March meeting minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes of the last month meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes from the March 2021 meeting? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. So first up, we have some old business, which isn't really old business, but we've talked about it before and has now come to fruition. Commissioner Jude Walton has come up with a draft of a training plan for commissioners. And before she launches into this piece of work, which took considerable time and effort on her part, I want to point out that one of the things about having a new commission that has oversight responsibilities is that all commissioners need to be trained in oversight. We are not simply residents and visitors and workers in Ann Arbor who are sitting around thinking about policing. We go through extensive training and learn about oversight as a profession, and then we learn to apply those to Ann Arbor specifically. And so although everyone has undertaken training, this is the first time, because we are such a new commission, that we have had this training plan laid out. And Commissioner Walton has gone through quite a bit of work to think about what kinds of things should be included in training, timelines for training. And that was something that we needed to do after having done the work for some time. So we're very grateful to her. She's come up with a pretty comprehensive training plan. So please take it away.
How much launching I have, but yeah, I did. Sorry, I apologize. I couldn't get this out to people sooner. I was still kind of tweaking and playing with it. And my thought was today, if we could just get, definitely specific comments as people have them, but if we can get a general, yes, this is good, there's probably still a little bit more refining and formatting to do to make it more user friendly. I just figured this was the point where I thought that the content was about right. And so, what I did was I started with some assumptions, just kind of trying to get realistic about time and how much time folks really would have. And so I think it is a general kind of assumption that for commission work, commissioners will be doing about 10 hours a month. So when I break down, a couple of hours for the meeting, an hour to do email, and then allowing some time for other kind of, subcommittees or whatever else, thinking about maybe 3 hours of specific training a month. That might be more in the first couple of months for a commissioner, obviously, because they're going to need to get up a little bit more up to speed. But this way, hopefully, the idea being that it's part of our commitment that we'll be doing, learning and training for about 3 hours a month moving forward. There is all of this, and the content that I have, particularly on the things for learning, is really taken from NACOL. At the end of their guide to setting up oversight commissions, they actually have a lot of these things kind of specified out. I tailored them for us. Some I removed because they didn't seem as relevant, and I put a little bit of emphasis on kind of certain other areas. But basically, the content's taken from that. I have all the content. I may not have the right resource or training kind of spot yet. That's something that we still need to develop more. I'm very conscious of almost all of NACOL stuff is just reading. And I'd like to try and find some more diverse things, some more video-based things, more things that are meetings. Just reading alone, I don't think is really going to be enough, or it's not going to meet everybody's needs. So again, still some work on sort of resources to be able to find and locate. The other thing that I have out as a question, and it's a question in the document, is I think that there probably should be an additional set of training for anybody who's actually going to be doing the complaint review investigations. I just don't know exactly what that looks like or what time frame that fits in, but that's kind of out there as a placeholder. There's that additional piece for people who'll be taking on that. So basically, I've just sort of broken it down with the idea that in the first year, there's prescribed sort of trainings within the first 30 days, 90 days, at the 6-month point, and then by the end of the year. And then ongoing after that, it would just be rereading a couple of NACOL's base documents, the 13 principles for civilian oversight, and then ideally really the guidebook as well. And then attending 6 NACOL conference or webinar sessions, and they have multiple every month. So, and that I think should all fit really well into the timeline of about 3 hours roughly of learning per month. I don't know if there's questions or comments.
I'm actually going to put it up on the screen, but you guys go ahead. Commissioner Mary.
I was thinking about training because I do it on my own. And when I do it, I find what's more interesting for me. I'm not sure, if that is the best way to do it or what is applicable for my role in this commission. I wonder if it will be a good idea. I'm not suggesting it is, but it's a thought that we at least identify areas that the commission need to be trained in. Because if you go to NACOL, I mean, the amount of stuff there is so big and so overwhelming. So is the reading. So as a new commission, which areas we really need to work at, or as people who live in a city small like Ann Arbor with a specific problem or lack of, what do we need to learn? or one need of skill, one option that we do similar training and we can discuss it together. The other option is that, maybe we identify 3 areas that we need expertise in and divide the commission into 3 groups. These 3 groups will look into how to read reports. These 3 groups will look into how to look at police cameras, look at complaints. So we have experts on our commission that, if we need certain things, rather than leave it to individuals choose what they are interested in. And I don't know what kind of a collective knowledge we accumulate by that.
So I think that is a great idea, and Commissioner Walton has sort of laid out in the very beginning things that are probably necessary for people to know to start the work. And so that includes the 13 principles for civilian oversight. Understanding the city charter that was used when forming ICPOC, as well as thinking about understanding the ordinance that created us. We all need to be versed in NACO's code of ethics. We all need to understand citizens' review of police, for just thinking about different kinds of police oversight models, because there are several different kinds and we are kind of a hybrid of one of those. Everybody needs to meet the police chief. Everybody needs to complete a ride-along. Everybody needs to understand at least just basics about what wine garden rights are in terms of the National Labor Relations Board and what that means. You may know that if you already belong to a union, but if you don't, you need to understand what that means for police officers, for example, who belong to, some belong to a patrol officers union, some command officers union, et cetera, because that guides then what oversight individuals can do. And the same thing with thinking about garrity rights, and as people make suggestions about sort of what oversight ought to do, that's just important to understand. So then attending some conferences and sessions. One of the things that Commissioner Walton pointed out is that it would probably be good if about 25% of us were NACO certified. And that means, Anand, that they're going to have they're going to have training in a broad variety of ways. You have to be trained in several different areas of NACO in order to do that. And I know that some commissioners are working towards that, and I got certified last year. So, and as Commissioner Walton mentioned, it'll be necessary for people who are going to review complaints to also learn about body cam footage and reading reports, although some of those are specific to Ann Arbor, and that's certainly something that we can train them on. It would certainly be helpful for others to learn about that as well. We all need to do training with the Ann Arbor Police Department insofar as they explain a lot of the ways that they have the rules and regulations by which they operate, thinking about the use of force continuum, how they get trained. And then there are times when the Ann Arbor Police Department will come back and offer a training to us on top of sort of that basic training. For example, a couple of us, 3 or 4 of us just did a 5-hour training with 2 police officers about 2 Mondays ago, where we were learning about their de-escalation training. And that is something on which everyone will be trained. I think by the end of June, all Ann Arbor police officers will be trained in that. And so they took us through the training as well. And so those things, as they come up, are probably important for all commissioners to engage with. It's important to attend the NACO conference, and there are several reasons for that, including getting the training, but also networking. And networking is not socializing, as has been suggested before, as much as it is gaining assistance. I have mentioned in the past how taxing this work is and how emotionally draining it is. And there are times when the only other people who understand what you're going through are other oversight professionals across the country. And that's fine. But more than that, there are times when we need help And other oversight professionals are able to help us, but we have to make those professional connections in order to do that. And that certainly benefits the city of Ann Arbor when we can do that, when we do not have to create, something from scratch when other institutions, other oversight groups are doing that. And so that networking is more than, getting to know people and, feeling better about your work. Much more than that is understanding the processes and the resources that can be had by collaborating with other agencies. And that's why it's so critical. Across this country, many people who are doing oversight are unpaid workers. And we need access to as many resources as we can get. And that is one of the things that gets facilitated by attending the conferences. This year, it will be virtual in August, and there'll be sessions a few times a week all the way through October. But in December, there will be an in-person conference as well, with the hope that many people will be vaccinated and able to travel. There will also be training there as well. And so I'm going to strongly suggest that anyone who has never been to one before attend it. We've had some turnover since the last conference, which we attended. And I think there were only 3 of us that attended part of that conference. And so these things are a part of training. You'll notice that at 12 months, Commissioner Walton suggested that people refamiliarize themselves with the 13 principles for civilian oversight. We have them posted on our website. They are very important. And then here she is talking about sort of what those certification requirements are, that you have to have attended 2 conferences. And so that conference, attendance is mandatory to become certified. And people have to do that twice before they can become certified. And they have to have a minimum of 45 hours of NACOL certified training, which would be outside of what we do at Ann Arbor. So this is not a lofty goal. This is a lot of work to get this done. You also have to read from the approved reading list. You have to kind of list what you read and explain that. So there's quite a bit that goes into being certified. We have that reading list. As I've mentioned before, we have a lot of the books that are on the reading list. And right now we have a mobile library, which is the trunk of my car. And I'm always happy to drive books to whomever is interested. But there are other kinds of civil rights reading that might be of particular interest for one person more than another, or reading about U.S. attorneys and case law. There's an awful lot of case law that's on the recommended reading list. And then visiting law enforcement facilities and collaborating even with other law enforcement agencies are all things that are part of the training that commissioners should go through. And so I think your suggestion is well taken, that we, diversify, but some of us also have to be able to do everything well.
NACOL do have the 6 tracks that they list. So maybe that's something I could look into a bit more. Maybe there's some tailored stuff to specialize in one of those afterwards.
I think it might be 4 big tracks. One of them is prisons. I think one is community. I used to actually have them on my bulletin board. One of them is training in and of itself. Another is community engagement. One of them is the prisons track, and I forget what the 4th one is. Probably so obvious I've forgotten it. I apologize. But you can diversify a little bit, but you have to have some from each of those groups, maybe with the exception of prisons, if you're going to get certified. So you have to kind of dive deeply into that. And certainly we do have a training budget. It is important that we are trained as we are reviewing complaints and trying to think about policy. And so it is really important that everybody get trained, and your ability to pay for that is not a consideration in terms of how much you get trained. Any other questions about this? How about the time frame? Does everybody think that they can commit to 3 hours of training a month? On top of kind of the other things that you would do, like onboarding, like Micaiah is just getting ready to kind of re-up with us, and she's just been with us a couple of months, and she's been back and forth between Ann Arbor and Detroit. And, she's got to do some training. Stephanie, who was kind of newer, has got to do some training. I don't know that everybody has done ride-alongs, for example. Obviously, COVID has impacted that, and that will not be a requirement until it is safe to do so. So just, to be clear. But what do you guys think about the amount of time that Commissioner Walton has suggested?
Yeah, well, I think it's reasonable. I don't know.
Yeah, the
I mean, for
training,
me it is, but I'm not working, you know.
the training itself could be either physical training or could be listening to or attending a webinar or class or something like that. So it should be a little bit defined to, it's more of generic thing versus specific. So few things can fall into that, because sometimes you might not have training that month, but you could attend webinars or classes or seminars or whatever.
Absolutely. Commissioner Todoro.
Just, I think for the training that you mentioned that we did with the police officers, that is a training that we did. We started with 4 of the information managers so that the information managers had this knowledge when they're reviewing complaints. But the officers did request that the entire commission do the training. You know, understanding that not everybody's reviewing complaints, but they did ask that the whole commission have an understanding of what it is that they do and how they get trained. So, you know, every once in a while we may get these that are 5 hours long. So it kind of exceeds your 3 hours, but it was well worth it to do. So I think the 3 hours is definitely doable, but just be prepared that we may have some others too.
I couldn't justify putting 10 hours a month knowing that we have the meeting and everything else in there. So I just tried to go with the sort of maybe average.
Exactly. No, that's perfect. I think it's a good average, really.
If somebody does 5 hours one month, then they can certainly do
Yeah.
2 hours, 1 hour the next month. Councilmember Rumley.
Thank you. I appreciate Commissioner Walton's time and effort and talent in putting this together. I believe there needs to be a two-prong approach to this, whether there is training that is uniformly applicable to all the commissioners. I don't believe that having a buckshot approach is going to get us to where we need to be. There are just some basic points here that have been laid out in the first 90 days that I think should be a part of it for all commissioners, and then each can go into their specific interests and talents and strengths. When we put together the commission, we wanted to bring people that had many different backgrounds together. We're not expecting folks to kind of have all the same perspective or talents. And so as we continue to evolve and learn, we'll be hopefully looking at that as well, as to try to find how to bake this bread and what kind of ingredients you need in order to get what you want. And I would suggest that, you know, the NCOLS certification is something that perhaps, you know, you're looking for from commissioners that have been on here for more than 3 years. You know, obviously, as it was stated, one of the requirements is to be at 2 of those conferences out of 3, 2 out of 3 years. And so looking more down the line, veteran leadership on the commission is to have those folks more expected to have that time and the experience to do that. I would try to not perhaps list the different things. I just see that in the bullet points in the first 30 days, in the first 90 days, I would try to combine those so they're all maybe in the first 90 days. So we're not putting any importance on one over the other. I think they're all important, and perhaps, you know, it gives the flexibility in scheduling and time. If folks can do something first, that's great. If not, but you really want it all done within the first, perhaps even 4 months. This commission doesn't meet very often, only once a month. And I do appreciate that, but it's not every other week or every week. So 3-4 months, you don't really get to see very many people in that time. And so I would suggest that, again, kind of collapsing that so it's all one. And expanding on the conversation. I do also believe that having a specific set of training for those who investigate complaints is fundamental. Those folks obviously have to have a skill set that's a little bit different and consistent. And so having that consistency with those information managers and folks investigating complaints is very important. And I would expect that training to be really highlighted and kind of elevated amongst all the other commissioners, with due respect to everybody, but it's a very important part. And perhaps maybe having one person who's not certified, but who is person like an apprentice who's learning along the way with the other folks who have been certified to investigate complaints, but having an apprentice who may want to come along and just learn from the contextual way of learning. I think Commissioner Walton has said that, where it's not all reading, but actually contextualizing some of the processes that the commissioners go through, and that's it. Thank you.
I'm going to disagree with part of that. I do think we do need to prioritize some things that need to be done sooner rather than later. I also sort of agree and disagree with one of your statements about us only meeting once a month. Absolutely, we do. We were intended to only meet every other month, and we very quickly realized that wasn't going to work. But I think the fact that we meet every month will allow people to do this other work when we are not together. And unfortunately, this is pretty arduous work. There's a lot of information that people need to be able to consume. It's not a commission where you can just kind of show up at the meetings and wing it. You actually need to bring quite a bit of background to the work that we do. And of course, most of the work that we do is not in the meetings. We're kind of reporting out on what we're doing at the meeting. But I think there is actually a hierarchy. And I know it probably wasn't clear, but we have worked on this plan for some time and done a bit of consultation within and without the commission, inside and outside of the commission, in terms of thinking about how to structure that. I, as a professor, have a great deal of appreciation for many different learning styles. And so, and Commissioner Walton has spoken to that perhaps reading is not always the best way to take in information. I would say from a memory standpoint, it's not. The research is clear on that. So I think that contextual learning is important. However, there is reading that has to be done. There are specific things that commissioners need to know. I know the city attorney's office has kind of weighed in on that. There's some things they want to make sure that people understand. The public has been pretty clear on that. And so there's a lot of work that goes into thinking about a training plan like this. And we were able to harness kind of national resources to do that, and thinking about Ann Arbor specifically, and then also thinking about, options for people. I think it is important that everyone comes with a diverse background, but that we're going to have some common, some training in common and a baseline level of information in common, even though we may be wildly differently interested in different, areas of oversight, and that is fine. We have built in that people who are information managers, which are the people who review cases, will have additional training to do, and everyone is aware of that. And so everybody here knows what they're signing up for. As we recruit new commissioners, we want them to understand kind of the rigor of sitting on this particular commission. It is a little bit different from other commissions. We get that. We are scrutinized certainly differently, and we have to have, quite a bit of baseline of knowledge. We've got to know about the Ann Arbor Police Department from the Ann Arbor Police Department. We've got to think about oversight from a national level. We've got to get familiar with case law. We've got to get familiar with reading. And we do have to do some things sooner than later. We cannot have commissioners who at 60 days still don't understand sort of the overarching principles of oversight. I would hope that people who are thinking about sitting on this commission would go ahead and look at those kinds of things before they join us, to see if those are the kinds of things that they are interested in, that they get familiar with NACO's Code of Ethics. Lots of us belong to kind of professional associations, American Psychological Association, Society for Neuroscience, where we have codes of ethics. Some people don't. Everybody needs to do that, though, in the first 30 days. And they need to understand that they have to work ethically in the first 30 days. It cannot be lumped in at some other time, for example, because people need to say, oh, this isn't exactly what I signed up for, or no, I don't want to do this, or whatever, and that needs to happen pretty quickly. So I think, are there other commissioners who have questions about this as we flesh it out? Commissioner Hoffman?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing is also some commissioners are involved in subcommittee meetings during the month. So that adds to not just only our main meeting, it's also we have 1 or 2 meetings sometimes during the month, or sometimes they're training.
That's the breakdown for the 10 hours I had was 1 main meeting, an hour of email, 3 hours of training, and then 4 hours for committee meetings, community meetings, and other things. There's plenty of times when it goes over that, but that was roughly how I had it broken down.
That's right. Some of us thought 10 hours a month was hilarious.
If I could, I'm sorry, I apologize, but I just feel like I need to make sure that I appreciate and I don't want to diminish the time that commissioners put into the work. When I speak that we only meet once a month, that is as a board. I know people meet outside of this to discuss things that they're talking and working on. But as a board is what I'm trying to get to when I made that comment. And 10 hours a month is on the very light side. That is just touching the bases. I think if folks really want to have an impact, it's more like 15 to 20 hours a month, especially if they're gonna be on the first year. So we do tell that to folks who we prospectively want to place on the commission that it's going to be more like 15 hours, I would say, rather than 10. I just don't think 10 hours can do it justice unless you're extremely efficient.
And some of us are, and I think we've accounted for that. And if you speak again, Councilmember Romali, before I acknowledge you, I will mute you because I have like the magic mute button over here. So you just hold your horses next time. Are there any other commissioners who have questions about the training plan? Okay. We will keep tweaking it. I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Amiri.
Okay, is it possible that we are emailed this plan so we can look at it and communicate directly with Jude if we have some suggestions?
I emailed it earlier today. I emailed it earlier today.
After the meeting, maybe you want to change a few things, but then email it to us, we can take our time looking at it because that was quick. And if we have some feedback, we can just send you directly something. Okay.
Yeah. Respond to Jude's email in the next week. Take your time, look it over. You may think of some things to add. You may think of some things to change. We understand many commissioners work more than 10 hours. Some will work 10 hours. And there may be some months where you work a little bit less. We understand the ebb and flow of that. Unfortunately, the temperature of the United States has been such that most of us have been doing more work than that for some time. So please give Jude your specific comments, reply to her email in the next week, and then she can bring it back and show us any tweaks that she's had to make. And then we can help use that to get folks onboarded, and everybody else can start sort of checking off how they're doing as far as training goes. Commissioner Offman.
Yes, we would like to acknowledge Commissioner Billups joining us. So he needs to state the location.
Hello, I'm here. Present.
What location, Commissioner Billups?
Oh, location, Ann Arbor, actually Ypsilanti at home.
Thank you.
Councilmember Song, I'm sorry I didn't see your hand up.
I was just wondering if you're including time from the retreat as training.
I think we probably will, and hopefully we'll get to do that annually. And so in that month, maybe that'll suffice. And we have started working in earnest on that. But I think we will. And I'm not sure, it might be maybe considered orientation because we'll be doing some visioning and thinking about strategic planning. And there may be some training in there. So certainly part of that might be considered training.
Okay, I don't want to add to your list, but I don't want to forget that's on there too. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, shall we move on to new business? We have Commissioner Teodoro Hargraves, who's going to talk a little bit about some recent incidences and opportunities or alternatives.
So basically what we were looking at, I had a question about where the PD was on the data presentation from back in the fall. So I do have a quick update on that. I think that's something different than you were just referring to, Lisa, but I had this in front of me and I wanted to get it out. So what they are working on that, and for the other commissioners, what I'd like from you, not right now, but something you can jot down real quick to get back to me, is types of information that you would be interested in the department keeping so that if we were to ever question it. So an example is trespass. I recently asked the question of, what is the breakdown of why the police are called to a location to read trespass? So for instance, is it because someone's loitering? Is it because someone's being disruptive? I was interested in seeing what the breakdown was. And because of the way the records have traditionally been kept, getting that for me is actually very time consuming under the current way that we keep our files. So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to find ways that the department is able to collect more easily when the incidents occur, so that further down the line, if we ever have the question, they're able to send it to us in a more expedited manner than what we have now. So if there are things like that that you think we should be keeping, or that the department should be keeping, please let me know, and then we can share them with the chief. But also keep in mind that we can't guarantee everything, because some of this data and how it's kept is also dependent upon the city's information system. So we have to make sure that, all the stars line up for us. So I just want to keep that in mind, because sometimes you might go on to, and I know I do this, I go on to other cities' websites and I see something and I think, oh, this dashboard looks great. It's nice and clean. It's laid out this way. It's laid out that way. And then we find out our website can't do that. So that's just the kind of stuff to keep in mind. And the, so, sorry, I have too much in front of me. The other things as far as the incidents that we're seeing in downtown, that we would be thinking of the possibility of having unarmed response. And these are the things that I don't necessarily know whether or not these are in the forefront of people's thoughts, or when they think of what unarmed response would be, or how we're looking into these types of matters. But we recently had an incident downtown with a homeless person, and he was, I don't know how he was aggressively approaching outdoor diners. And there's differences of opinion of what occurred in the incident. I don't know. I haven't seen a police report or anything, so I don't know what actually happened. So I don't want to get into specifics. But the person that was involved is someone that's been known to the downtown. The businesses know who the individual is. He's been around for many years. And so when we think of unarmed response, for many of us in the downtown, that's the kind of unarmed response you're thinking of. You're not expecting to see one or two armed police officers show up in a situation like that. But right now, those officers are the ones who know these individuals. Yeah, I was recently in a community meeting and somebody was discussing an incident and a police officer was in the meeting also. And the police officer knew immediately who the person was talking about and was able to help the person during the meeting and help them understand what the current situation was and everything. So the officers are out there quite a bit responding to these types of incidences. But the core question is, does it need to be an armed officer in body armor? Are these the types of calls that we could have someone out there, on call, much like, a police officer 24/7 who can respond to individuals to help de-escalate a situation or get them the assistance that they need. But I think, is any of you have examples of these types of things? Keep them in mind, write them down, talk to us about them, because I think these are the types of incidences that are going to come up when we start working with Tom Crawford and the group that he puts together to discuss a program and what best fits Ann Arbor for unarmed response. So that's pretty much where I'm at. I don't know if any of you have other examples of incidents. If you spend any time downtown, you probably know one or two things about Liberty Plaza. That's another place that our officers will routinely go into. One of the officers who gave us the training, he mentioned that he'll go in there a lot of times and the back sheet of a trespass form has services listed on it for people. So what he'll do is he won't write trespass, but he'll rip off that back page and he'll use that as something to give out to folks to help them know what services are out there for them. So these are the types of things that just to keep in mind, because we know that we're going to be part of those discussions with Tom Crawford. I know I've already spoken to him a couple times, getting our points in there saying we should be there. So I think we just need to have these types of examples and an idea of what we would like, what is our goals, so that we can articulate those to Tom when the time is right. Cool, no questions.
I can, you know what I can do with you guys' permission? I could switch the order of the agenda a bit and talk about unarmed responders here because Francis has kind of brought that up, and then switch to Micaiah. I believe I have mentioned to this group before thinking about traffic enforcement without police. The fact that Dante Wright was killed in Minnesota by a police officer who indicates that she meant to pull her taser is tragic. However, it's not new. It's not the first time. You guys could hear me go on and on about Philando Castile and Sandra Bland and other people who have been killed as a consequence of having been stopped by police for failing to signal early enough, perhaps having expired tags, perhaps having air freshener hanging. We have talked about the fact that traffic stops are the most common way that people come in contact with the police. And we need to think about whether that is necessary. We do not have armed parking ticket enforcement. One of the things I'd like to emphasize is that, failing to signal, use your turn signal, or failure to use it soon enough is not a misdemeanor crime. It is a civil infraction. And yet we have people potentially being killed and being killed for civil infractions. We were fortunate enough to be doing training with Ann Arbor police officers. We watched some of these things on camera during the training. Some of them were in the news during the time that we were training, and we were talking about that. And they could point out things that police officers in other jurisdictions did wrong. But the question becomes, do you need armed police officers to do that? And so my analogy has been thinking about sending an armed person to make sure you pay your taxes to the IRS on time, and whether that's necessary, and what we could do by taking people out of harm's way in that way. I was in a meeting with several of you, and we were talking about how the city of Berkeley has just done this. So there's no question that it is doable. They have turned traffic enforcement over to a city department who will now go and enforce things like failing to use your turn signal, as opposed to armed police. And they can hand out tickets in much the same way that parking tickets are handed out. And so I wanted to kind of introduce this idea. There are lots and lots of articles about this, lots of research on this. And you can, sort of think about what traffic enforcement without police could look like in Ann Arbor. This would not prevent the police from chasing people who have stolen a car or who've robbed a bank or kidnapped someone. This would strictly be about traffic enforcement, which we know is particularly deadly for people of color. I have been reminded by city officials that African Americans do not make up a significant portion of Ann Arbor, but I think we have to be concerned about everyone, because what happens to any of us happens to all of us. It's kind of painful to have to say that sentence, but I think that's where we are at this point. And so what I would like is for everybody, and I can send some links around to people to start thinking about this, but I'd like for our commission to start thinking about what this might look like. And I understand that it's, a very, very different idea. You have heard the prosecutor talk about pretextual stops, where perhaps you're interested in apprehending someone, so you follow them for a while, and then when they fail to signal or fail to signal soon enough, you pull them over, and then you get to do whatever you were interested in, or hey, can we look around in your car? Or while they're ostensibly writing you a ticket, they're looking around in your car, where the purpose of the stop was never the traffic infraction, but it was some other interest that they had in you, whether that was, being suspected of a crime or driving while black, for example. And so the prosecutors indicated he will not be prosecuting things that come from pretextual stops. And that is one good way to work on it, but it would be good to prevent them in the first place. And so I just wanted to kind of introduce this idea, because I know it might be new for some people. And there is work from the prosecutor's office, talking about this as well, their rationale for doing that. But the goal across the country is to decrease people coming in contact with armed police in this way. I believe Kevin Karpiak at last city council meeting mentioned that if such a department were formed that took over traffic enforcement, it should be built on anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, transphobic, other stereotyped groups, with the intent of it being free from some of the bias that we see in other institutions that are already built. To be clear, I understand the police to be no more racist than all of America. And so when we create new departments, we need to do that with intentionality and think about being anti-racist as well as everything else, anti-ableist, for example, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense, right? People could still be targeted. And so that was the goal of that, just to sort of bring this up. I'll be sending you guys some things to look at, and just to get us thinking about that, whether that might be something at one point on which we might make a formal resolution. Any questions about that before we let Ms. Ship go? Okay, Micaiah, take it away.
Okay, so I've had the opportunity to talk to some different organizations on campus. A lot of the organizations were adamant about, combating racial injustice on campus and talking about what they hope for policing in the future. So first, I want to talk about like what already is going on campus. So we have AAPD on campus, obviously, but we also have the task force, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, which is the University of Michigan's Division of Public Safety and Security. So they kind of work hand in hand, but obviously the task force is a lot more prominent on campus. But there are very similar complaints across the board. I've talked to CSG, which I'm going to shorten it for like the sake of me talking, but it's the Central Student Government. It's the Government for Students, and they have a new campaign under new leadership for the following year. I've been talking to them very closely, and they have been talking to the Students of Color Liberation Front about what they hope to see regarding policing for this following year during their term. I'm hoping to be nominated for the policy action chair so that I can work more hands-on and actually meet the demands that they're having, because it's been said that these have been demands for a very long time, and it doesn't seem like anybody's actually putting their foot on the pedal for them. So I hope to make sure that actually happens within this next year. But like I said, most of the demands are the same across the board. So obviously, the number one pressing concern is the demilitarization and disarmament of AAPD on campus. That's a short-term goal, actually. They hope to make sure that it's not a surprise that people are thinking that it escalates the situation rather than de-escalating the situation to have police on campus, especially when the interaction that they're having with them are nonviolent interactions, and they're actually meeting them because of a nonviolent interaction. So they feel like they shouldn't be in the space to begin with. And oftentimes it causes fear, big fear, especially among Black people, especially considering the climate of the nation right now. It causes, people's heart to race. And so right now, the concern is that they should be disarmed. I'm was told that it's around like 20% they are armed, and they want it to be at 0%. For now, the ultimate goal in the end is to remove AAPD from campus entirely, and like was mentioned earlier, implement some sort of system, which isn't detailed right now, but some sort of system that is community-based, that is led by the community and is led by them. They should be unarmed, and they should be the de-escalation service rather than having police on campus. Another thing is that I know DPSS is separate, but like I said, they work pretty similarly. So I also want to name some things that is a concern for them. They have an advisory board. Actually, I want to go back. So there's no active body in place right now that oversees the campus policing and AAPD. So they're hoping that I would be that, but once again, I'm only one person, and CSG has other concerns that they're trying to combat while doing this as well. So they hope to have some kind of student oversight for what's going on at the moment in the meantime before AAPD is completely removed from campus. But DPSS, they have oversight. They have a student advisory board. However, I'm not sure how active that is. And I do know that they are severely struggling in the representation category on that. And for that reason, you can't expect for it to be completely productive, considering that the people that it is disproportionately affecting aren't even being vocalized in this. So that's a concern. And I actually went on the DPSS website, and it's crazy because they have a section for complaints and praises on their website, which is, in my opinion, very counterproductive, considering that if you had a complaint with them, I don't think you would go to them to do it. So that's a problem. And they want to make sure that students just have a voice in whatever is going on. I know that for the pandemic, there was a Michigan ambassadors program implemented, and then they redacted that because it was basically armed police going around monitoring students to see if they were behaving during the pandemic. And that in itself shows that they are capable of implementing new things, new systems, but is it the ones that we're actually advocating for is the real question. And I don't think that it is at the moment. And I think that's what organizations like Central Student Government and Student Liberation Front are kind of trying to spearhead. So disarming, demilitarization, and essentially removing completely are the goals for the UMich campus at the moment. I also wanted to add, this is not about that. This is about the social media. I have been working on the social media, not so that the commission can seem like quirky or fun or anything, but I have been hearing that like with the organizations on campus that the little infographics have been really helpful on teaching people oversight, because you'd be surprised how many students don't even know what oversight is. Like every time I tell them, they're like, what even does that mean? So I think they've been really helpful. If you guys want me, like if there are any topics or any things that you guys really want me to cover, I can do that. I feel like we're making progress in the right direction.
I have seen the infographics on Instagram and they were very educational and informative, and I appreciated it because our production of informational and informative social media posts was literally zero before. I would have appreciated it even if we had had some, but I especially appreciate it because it was zero before. Commissioner Todoro.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask a couple questions so I understand everything correctly. When AAPD is on campus, is that like, are they doing things like in university buildings, on university property? Like, are they walking through Ingalls Mall and on the diag and things like that?
So I know that they're on property. I'm not sure the extent to where like in the buildings are. I'm not sure about that yet, but I do know that they're on property, especially when they had the Michigan Ambassadors program. They were, you know, going around in the near the dorm areas, the social areas, they were everywhere.
Yeah. And when they say they want them off entirely, I know that the University of Michigan only has they're limited in what their response can be in the case of emergency. So for instance, when the 911 call went out that there was an active shooter in Angel Hall, that automatically triggers Ann Arbor response because Ann Arbor is the one with the resources to respond to an active shooter like that. So are those the types of things that the group they do not want Ann Arbor there at all? They just want DPS responding in those incidences?
I think what they mean is that not entirely. So in those instances, obviously they feel like they should be there. Safety is obviously the number one goal, but I feel like when we talk about non-violent offenses, so when we talk about shutting down a party or pandemic patrol, that's when it shouldn't even be considered. And we wouldn't even say that we want DPSS, but we want a system that is like you guys talked about earlier. It's de-escalation groups and that are made up of community members that can actually do those things that are unarmed. So we don't need AAPD or even DPSS to do that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am, for reporting out. Our last piece of new business was a community forum that NACOL had. So the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement has lots of training opportunities. However, because of the Derek Chauvin verdict and the Dante Wright killing happening back to back, as well as other murders that have happened or killings that have happened since then in a short period of time, they called kind of a general meeting and lots of people logged on. And talked about a few things that were sort of pressing and took the temperature of what was going on in different communities. One of the things that people talked about was sort of an organized response to the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2020. And so if folks could sort of get familiar with what that act is and what it suggests and what it might offer, and decide if that is something that this commission would like to make a recommendation about, that would be helpful one way or the other. There is a bit of movement in different states based on how their legislatures work in terms of thinking about police discipline and police disciplinary records. The state of New York's legislation last summer voted to make all police officers' disciplinary records public. Obviously, that's not the case in Michigan at this point, although I believe there is legislation in the House that has been introduced in that way from a congressperson from Detroit, I believe. I can't remember the House bill at this time, I'm sorry. But lots of people are thinking about sort of national standards for policing. And so Obviously, there's a huge debate because states get to do what they want to do, and municipalities get to run their policing in the way that they want. But lots of people are thinking about national standards for oversight. Obviously, some pieces can work in some states and not others. The state of Maryland, I believe about 2 weeks ago, had a veto-proof majority as they disbanded their officers' Bill of Rights. And so their police officer disciplinary records will now be public, and there are lots of changes to policing in Maryland that are coming up now because of that. The ACLU also weighed in on the call and talked about how, although police unions are unions, they function very differently from other kinds of labor unions. And again, the topic of arbitration came up again. And so there is a bit more attention on that across the country. One of the things that this group needs to be careful about is in some states, police unions have attempted to bargain for or against oversight, offering up this concession if they don't have to have oversight, for example, that is not our exact concern. But thinking about that is something of which everybody should be aware, particularly as the city council is working on the command officer's contract. That is not a feature of it to my knowledge. But what I'm saying is patrol officer's contract will be coming up again. And so we'll have to think about those issues. And this time around, we'll be thinking about them before city council has voted on them for the first time. And so we'll all need to start thinking about the contract again and what things we might advocate for in terms of public safety. There are things sometimes in contracts that when you get down into the details about when officers can be interviewed, whether they get 48 hours rest after an incident before they're interviewed, or whether they have to be interviewed by the end of shift. And that sounds like a small thing, but when you are trying to get testimony from a person who's involved in an incident, those are actually huge differences. The state of Virginia has passed a law that indicates that any city that wants civilian oversight, should be able to have it, and that they are allocating funding to do that. Obviously, the state of Michigan is not there. One of the things that came up is the standard of being able to use force when there's a reasonable threat, as opposed to being able to use force when there's an imminent threat. And I know some of you guys have been reading Rosa Brooks's book, Tangled Up in Blue. She was a police officer, and she has started the Georgetown Center for Innovative Policing. And she talks about that burden. And so that'll be a conversation that will be had at a much larger level than ours, but I want everybody to be well-versed in thinking about that. I forwarded you guys some peer-reviewed research on the impact of oversight and how oversight has the ability to have an impact on certain kinds of arrests. And that was done with a variety of kinds of oversight, and you can read that in the methodology. And I think that's about all of the notes I have from that meeting. Training, the conference this year will be impacted by what has happened in the last 12 months. And one of the things that I want to say to commissioners is making sure that you guys are taking care of yourselves. I think self-care is one of those things that we often neglect. And watching body cam footage, for example, can be very stressful. That stress accumulates, particularly if we don't mitigate it. And so I do want to make sure that everybody on this commission is at least thinking about the impact of the work. The work is arduous in that there's a lot of it to do, but sometimes it's also psychologically draining if you're watching things that are disquieting. And so it would be remiss of me to not remind everybody to try to take care of yourselves and look out for the stress that you're under, as we want police officers to do. Right? I've been talking for a long time about the mental health of police officers and making sure that they have the resources they need to deal with the very stressful jobs that they have. And as oversight professionals, you guys need to think about that as well. So, are there any reports? We don't have reports from outreach or anything like that. So I think we have no reports from committees, if I am correct. Are there any other communications that we need to include before we go back to public comment or public forum?
Chair Jackson, if I could just say real quick, I know I came into the meeting late, but I just wanted to, I don't know if it was talked about, the fact that we had a great training, the leads training that we, some of us participated in, and just want to say if any of the commissioners have not had the opportunity yet to do the leads training, to make sure that you do. I think it was informative for us to understand some of the strategies that police officers, that AAPD will be using, and that all of their officers will be trained, from my understanding, by the end of June with this new procedure. I just wanted to state that I thought we got a lot of information from that training. So,
and the officers are really helpful. So they were obviously good at training other police officers, but they were also really good at training us. And, you know, we have varying levels of experience, but none of us are police officers. And yet they did a really good job translating what they were talking about for us.
yeah.
And we were able to ask them very candid questions. I had a million questions about what motorists should have done in some of the cases that we saw, about police training, and they acknowledged the ways in which training has changed in just the last 5 years, in the last 10 years. And they were pretty forthcoming, I felt, as I asked sometimes difficult questions. They were pretty straightforward, and I really appreciated the experience of being able to just sort of ask them questions as we're watching really disturbing video. Commissioner Mary.
You know, I'm not really sure what kind of training you are talking about. Obviously, some of you went together to a training that I wasn't aware of. And if we want to do it, I don't know how to go about doing it.
So it's Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, I believe is what the acronym stands for. And it is, to simplify it, not disrespectfully, a way of doing de-escalation training. And they are training, they have two trainers who are training all of the other Ann Arbor Police Department police officers. And so everyone by the end of June, I believe, will be trained in this. And they were able to talk about ways in which they had de-escalated situations. And they gave scenarios that had happened in Ann Arbor, but they also used other kinds of incidences to show. They also did a pretty candid job of showing things that went badly. And they were pretty candid about those things. And so I found it to be very interesting to see how they were training each other and what kind of training Ann Arbor Police would be exposed to in the next few months. And so Francis will probably send out more info about that again. I'm sorry, Commissioner Todoro, you just jump in.
No, that's okay. One of the officers is actually going out on parental leave, one of the officers that trained us. So he'll be back at the end of May. And at that time, I'll send out notice and we'll try to schedule another session for the rest of the commissioners.
Okay. Thank you. That'll be helpful.
Hey, I just got a correction too. It was Law Enforcement. Oh, dang it. That's all right. Hold on. I got it wrong. Law Enforcement Active De-Escalation is the correct acronym. Thank you, Denise. And Councilmember Song.
If we're wrapping up for public comments, I just wanted to share one thing. There's actually a webinar that's happening now. A public health professor, Paul Fleming, whose research is on policing and impact on BIPOC communities, had sent me a link from the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom. It's a teach-in, Imagine a Safer World, Alternatives to Policing. And the link to register, it started at 7. And the link to register is bit.ly/alt2police. So if anyone wants to
ALT and
T-
another TO police.
police, yeah.
Denise, can I chat in here? Can I post this?
I don't know if I didn't know how I can put it in the chat. I'm sorry, but
We don't seem to have a chat.
yeah.
I don't
But if
think we
anyone
have
wants
a
to
chat.
extend the time, if anyone wants to continue after this meeting to webinar, I was going to jump on.
And this teach-in would be a type of training. Just saying.
I'm not counting my hours. I
Right,
don't
you're
think
not.
Ali and I are allowed to count.
Right.
Like if we counted our hours, we would.
Yes,
cry
I don't count
first.
mine. Nor just Francis. But again, the website is bit.ly/ALTTOPOLICE. So
Yep.
in Alt2 Police, there are no spaces. It's going on now. You could probably register and hop on. I think these things are very useful. I know Councilmember Song and I went to one done by Public Health here at the University of Michigan. But imagining a safer world, alternatives to policing, thinking about other ways to ensure public safety are really good, I think, for thinking about things, maybe not so much outside the box anymore, but for thinking about things that have not been traditionally considered, but seem to be really working in some places now. And so now we're getting data on how these things are working. So Denise, do you see anyone for public forum?
No, I do not.
I'm not sure I'm going to believe I'm saying this, but it's 7:18. Is there a motion to adjourn? I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth.
Motion to adjourn our current meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? We are adjourned. This might be a record.
That's